Hello, hello. Thank you for tuning in and checking out this video that I'm going to be presenting today. This is going to be the new format I'm going to be presenting in. It's going to allow me a little bit more time to spend on each topic, and thus I think bring you guys a little bit more value in when it pertains to some of these more advanced topics. I definitely think it's going to be helpful to have a little bit more time to discuss some of these issues a little bit more in depth. So we'll open up the Q&A on the Wednesday night calls a little bit more and be able to tackle individual issues. And hopefully we'll get a little bit better participation in those evening calls. And then remember, you guys can always use the Calendly link to set up those one-on-ones. It's definitely going to be beneficial if you're just starting out or you're hitting that halfway point. It's probably a good time to do some goal assessments and make sure we're on track to hit your goal. And if you're just getting started, just to walk you through the processes and get a good picture on where you're at the moment. So today we're going to be talking about cortisol, and there's going to be a significant amount of scientific data that will load in on the front end with that. Excuse me. And then I'll finish up with some actionable items, some ways that you can avoid those cycles, and ways that you can get out of that cycle if you do find yourself inside of a stressful situation or extended period of stress. And this is all in relation to gaining weight and building muscle mass and how stress, particularly cortisol, affects those components. So what is stress? Stress is the physiological response to pressure. That pressure can be internal or external. You have emotional stress and you have physical stressors, working, different things like that. And some of the physiological effects that can take place if you are paying attention, you'll notice increased heart rate, you'll have elevated blood sugars, blood pressures, and this is all going to trigger that release of that stress hormone that we were just mentioning, cortisol. And the responsibility of cortisol, the role of cortisol, is that it is released in that stressful situation, and it really helps to trigger that fight or flight response in the nervous system. And basically, it triggers its own hormonal cascade, um, and so sometimes these can be beneficial for our ancestors. Obviously, played a part. It's a part of your normal circadian rhythm, which is your sleep cycle, and we'll kind of go into that a little bit more. But most importantly, I believe it has the biggest impact on our day-to-day lives, especially when you talk about chronic conditions, when it comes to the metabolic effects that it has. There's a couple of major components that cortisol is going to have that impact your metabolism greatly. So, gluconeogenesis is probably one of the biggest ones, big scientific word. All it really means is you're switching over your fuel sources from carbohydrates to non carbs, so proteins and fats. And that's to target the amino acids and the triglycerides. They're heavier energy components. It requires a little bit different fermentation process that's slower to extract that energy out of the amino acid or the triglyceride. Having said that, normally you use the Krebs cycle, and that's just a carbohydrate burner. It's much more efficient. But you are going to be actively breaking down proteins and fats, more so proteins than fats, when you enter into this phase of gluconeogenesis. And again, that's triggered when you have an elevated level of cortisol. So if you are inside of a strength training protocol, trying to lose weight, stress is definitely something that you want to be aware of, because if you start losing weight and you're not doing appropriate scans daily or weekly or monthly or whatever interval is most appropriate for you, you might notice that you're losing weight, and that weight actually might come from your muscle mass, which is definitely not a good thing. So, just something to be aware of. Having said that, it does raise your blood sugars, and that happens through a couple of different factors. You're still burning carbohydrates, that Krebs cycle is still rolling, so you have blood glucose naturally occurring at normal levels. With that gluconeogenesis, it's going to be slightly elevated. Cortisol also acts as an insulin antagonist, so it's going to bind with that molecule, that hormone, and allow it to ineffectively attach with the receptors on the storage tanks. So insulin's released in the body, and it's basically a transporter hormone. It locks itself into the receptor on a muscle belly. That muscle belly opens up, sucks in some sugar for storage, and business goes as usual in an effective manner because that blood sugar is effectively regulated by that insulin molecule. Having said that, if it's bound with cortisol, it's unable to fit appropriately in that receptor, and thus no opening of the storage tank, no absorption of that blood glucose, and it continues to rise out of control, really. And so the only thing that the pancreas can do to combat that is to continue to excrete more and more insulin to the bloodstream. This is what's called insulin resistance. You have a resistive response of a normal level of insulin, and you start taking medications or different things like that to combat that. And that, obviously leads on to major issues later on in life. We all are very familiar with those, I'm sure, but it's definitely something that's going to be antagonistic towards a long, healthy, productive life, especially if you're trying to lose weight and gain some muscle mass. And finally, just the biggest one on there is it's going to encourage catabolism of your proteins, and that is your muscle bodies. That is for a primary reason of having access to those amino acids, particularly in the muscles. And the reality is muscles are probably one of the most expensive items on the body. They're very hard to build up. They're hard to maintain. It requires a good bit of effort for the body to maintain that muscle mass. And if it's not treated appropriately, it will eliminate it as quickly as possible. Because you got to think that your body is preparing itself for a short period, a short stint of starvation or hardship. So it's going to set the body up in the most appropriate manner to handle that current hardship. It's not thinking about any long-term habits or goals or anything like that. It's really merely basing that off of survival. And if the current situation is set up in dire straits, your body's going to set itself up for that and prepare. So again, gaining any muscle mass during this time is going to be extremely ineffective, if not impossible. So to go into it a little bit further, obviously cortisol does have an effect on gaining weight. One of the biggest things that you'll notice, and a lot of diabetics will talk about this, or pre-diabetics will talk about this, is the cravings that they experience or the parchness that they feel. And that is, just the body's way of sending that signal that we need to get that blood sugar raised up at an appropriate level to stave off this fast that they have assumed is pending based on those hormonal effects. And so that is going to trigger, the increased consumption of sugary foods. Having said that, there's some research that shows that the stress led to a 20% increase in abdominal fat, and this is probably the worst fat that you can get, your visceral fat, something that you definitely don't want to have. You don't want to carry a lot of fat around your organs. Typically, it's not necessarily the healthiest place to carry it. It's very hard to mobilize, so once it's on, it tends to stay. And so this can just be another component of cortisol. And when it comes to gaining weight, that should definitely be considered if you're noticing that you're in those stressful situations. These are the two things that you're going to have to focus on. If you're going to be losing muscle mass, you're not going to be able to put on that muscle mass as well. And then you're also going to be gaining fat, and the worst kind of fat, that visceral fat that just kind of stays on you permanently or is very hard to mobilize. So, and I previously just mentioned this in the very beginning, talking about that cycle, being stuck in that vicious cycle. And there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of when it comes to that vicious cycle. And there's three big ones that you should focus on. So it's the feedback loop, it's the emotional impact, and then finally breaking that cycle. If you are aware of what it is and that you're slipping into it, you should be able to break out of it in an effective manner. If you have feedback loops that are appropriately set up, stress and cortisol can be managed. And when you start seeing it turn into a stressful situation, you can pull up, you can do some self affirmations and reinforce good habits and break yourself away from that cycle even quicker. Some of the feedback loops that you should be relying on are social networks, professional help, cognitive performance, sleep, nutrition, and physical readiness, your level of physical activity. If you can keep track of those few indicators and set those up as appropriate feedback loops, it should be able to give you a good outlook on what your stress level is. We have a 5-question Q&A that we ask all our members before they start working out. I'm sure you guys have done those in your Train Heroic app. And it does ask you point blank, how stressed are you? And it's a 1 to 5 question. and answer that truthfully and look back at that scale and see what that trend line is creating. Is it going down? Are you getting more stressed? Or is it steady Eddie and you're doing okay with your management habits? Also, you want to remember to incorporate that emotional impact. Significant amount of research is showing that like physical fitness is the best way, is one of the best ways, including factoring in for medication, that you can treat depression, which shows to be just as effective, if not more so. But those emotional impacts are still going to have an effect. It's going to raise up your stress levels. It's going to raise up your cortisol if you've had a death in the family, if you have a new relationship or an end of an old relationship, or you're a parent with multiple kids and a lot of responsibilities that, or your parents are getting older, or whatever the case may be. Those things all have an impact on your life that are going to be hard to account for. Having said that, if you do know that one of these life changing events is happening, it may be appropriate to extend yourself a bit of grace, a bit of gratitudes for what you do have to be thankful for, rely on those social groups to peel you out of those situations. And then if it is in dire straits, or you find it necessary and appropriate, it might be important for you to get a hold of a professional and work with somebody in that capacity. All of these things are good ways to keep good balance and break away from those cycles of stress that can really mar your progress, stop it, and make it incredibly difficult to restart because you have that much bigger of a hill to climb up the very next time. So if you can incorporate some of these habits, I definitely think that you're going to be set up for success. Next, I want to just go over some of the biggest ones that I think that you should focus on for mitigating those the stress effectively. And like I said, breaking the cycle is going to be the most important one, and being aware of how that looks, and then maintaining awareness of what that overall well-being is, but not only the physical well-being but your mental well-being as well, and then having a decent strategy of overview, a strategy for overcoming those issues if they do present themselves. So having the feedback loops and having an actionable item that is going to move you outside of that condition. So what I like to do is use an anchor habit, something like a cup of coffee that I consistently do every single day. I don't need to be reminded. I don't need any other extra um, assistance and telling myself that I need to have coffee in the morning. It's something that I enjoy and I find easy to do, incorporate into my daily life. So that is my anchor habit. I'll attach to that a cup of water, a coffee cup full of water before I can get those things, before I can have access to my coffee. It helps me stack wins, helps me build better habits as far as like staying hydrated and different things like that. And honestly, it allows the hormones in my brain to burn off at an appropriate level. That cortisol drip to kind of go down after waking up and getting out of bed and getting my body moving allows those hormones to kind of bleed off before I introduce upper or caffeine into my brain and trigger that response to go right back the opposite way. So it allows it a little bit more time to regulate itself. And these types of techniques are what you can incorporate into your life at a significant level, or whichever level is appropriate to you, and that'll mitigate a lot of those stressful situations. And that should be also included when it comes to when the stress is overwhelming and you need to grasp onto more than one technique. You can string together a dozen of these or half a dozen of these techniques and really have a good impact on your outlook, on your mental well-being, on your physical well-being, with a combination of a myriad of different treatments. So two of the major ones that I want to talk about are your physical activity and your diet and your nutrition. So your physical activity, like I previously said, it's a great way to treat depression versus medicine. It's something that should be planned out in advance. A lot of the members in our group have noticed that they are most successful when they have pre-planned out their workouts for the week, and that's just simply because that part of the week has been already labeled and done and accounted for. I tell my members to physically log the workout before it has even started because they know when they do that, they are just further setting themselves down the road of commitment, telling themselves that they're actually going to do the workout, which mitigates that stress that much more. One, that they know that they're going to do the workout, and two, that it's actually scheduled. And then the same thing can be applied for nutrition and diet. If you can pre-plan, have the meal plan set up. I like to plan my week a little bit further in advance than most. Like if you can get it done on a Friday, end of the current week, or even on the Saturday before that next week starts. We all know that next week really does start on Sunday, so the preparation should be done prior to that. So if you want to use your Sunday as a meal prep day, that planning needs to happen on Friday or Saturday, and then you can conduct those activities on Sunday and then readdress them on Wednesday or something like that, and then continue out your day. Having said all of those things, if you do have those two facets pretty well buttoned up, the likelihood of you experiencing success or slipping into a stressful situation and staying there is relatively low, because the majority of your bulk activities, like uh, meal preparation, nutrition, and exercise, they'll be buttoned up and they'll be taken care of. And it's just not going to be something that you really have to worry about. The other thing is really being accountable to yourself for your emotional well-being. And some of the things that you can utilize are some mind-body techniques. And one of the ones I really like is just mindfulness. And that could be a myriad of different activities incorporate that you can incorporate to manage the levels of stress. And that can be journaling, it can be daily gratitudes, it can be breathing exercises, any type of mindful exercise that you find appropriate that can lower that stress and help kind of realign your center, your mental center. It's going to be effective. Meditation is always wonderful. We've done a good bit of guided meditations for the novice, which would be myself. My wife and I have participated in a handful of those, and we found them to be effective methods for recentering our thought and clearing our mind and staying focused on what's most important. So if you want to start your day out with something like that, that's a good idea, or end your day out with something like that. A lot of my mentors say how you finish the day is basically how you're going to start the next one. So if you're wasting a bunch of time perusing on your phone, watching social media, that's probably what you're going to do in the morning. Make sure you're spending it mindfully, setting yourself up for success, thinking about what you need to do, or what you need to focus on the most, and make sure that's front of mind. So when you wake up in the morning, it's the first thing that gets going and you can knock it out and then start stacking those wins and be more productive throughout your day. The other thing too is if you can incorporate some of these mind body techniques into your day, morning and night, then you're going to be able to get better sleep. And obviously, sleep is going to be one of the biggest things for lowering those stressful hormones in your body. It's fight or flight for a reason. The rest and digest is going to be the opposite end of the nervous system. The problem is those two cannot activate at the same time. So again, like we talked about in the very, very beginning, cortisol, it's going to be highest in the morning and it's going to be lowest before you go to bed. And that is truly because the body wants to be in that rest and digest while you're sleeping. This is going to be where you're going to get the best quality of sleep, or your REM sleep. And if those stress levels aren't down at an appropriate level, I don't care how much sleep you're not getting appropriate quality of sleep, because you're not going to be able to enter into those regions of sleep. So being mindful of those few things are going to be extremely beneficial when it comes to tackling your emotional support. And then the reality is just having good social systems in place, whether that be a relationship, a close personal relationship, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, something like that, long term. That would be fantastic options. Something that someone that you can confide in, family members, those trusted within our inner circle. And then you have your friend groups. You'll have sports teams, other types of social groups that you might be introduced to, Bible studies, different things like that. These are all going to be vital for getting outside perspective, getting to off gas and communicate with other adults, and make sure that you're not building up any sort of tension or stress that may be necessary or unnecessary otherwise. And just having the ability to talk about it with other people tends to typically relieve a lot of issues, because we're all really going through a lot of the same things. You just If you're stuck on an island, it's very easy to play the woe is me card. So all this kind of revolves around time management. Again, when you talk about the meal plans and the meal prep and the nutritional balance and the exercise and the friends groups and all of this kind of stuff, it really revolves around setting a schedule and being disciplined with that. and making sure that you're not over committing yourself, so you're causing yourself more stress, that you're prioritizing tasks appropriately to reduce the level of stress. Sometimes it's nice to knock off those easy things on your list, and that's great to get a lot of stuff done. But if those heavy tasks start to mount up, and you notice that you're starting to stress out about them because you're feeling overwhelmed, it'll definitely be time to start knocking off some of those bigger items on the list, before you can, handle your own self and start getting that stress level under control. And the final thing that I just want to briefly mention is sometimes it is important to seek out professional help. There's countless therapists or options out there nowadays, some online, some in person, some, more expensive, some overly qualified, some more passive. It really, there's a million different options out there that can suit anybody's need. I've done therapy since I was a little kid, on and off, and it's always been very helpful to be able to glean that insight, those techniques that weren't necessarily available to me. Your parents, when they're raising you, they only raise you off of what they know or those around them know. However, our world moves very, very fast and have become even more connected than they ever have been in the past. So the level of preparedness that some people have nowadays is just not enough compared to others. Having said all that, the tools are out there, the trained professionals are out there. And when a situation arises and you need to take therapy into that professional realm, utilize it and give your other social support systems a little bit of a breather when the times are heavy. If you're fortunate enough to have a long-standing relationship with a therapist, it's great. Having said that, I've always used different ones and found them all to be helpful and impactful in whichever capacity. So I think that's all I have on this so far. I went through that super fast, but I hope you guys got a good bit out of that. Again, a lot of science stuff, cortisol, big component there. But the main takeaway factor that I want you guys to be focused on is that sometimes we tend to push a little bit too hard, and we can get to the point where the benefits do not match the investment, and the ROI is negative. And so if you are in one of those those relationships where you're working out too hard or you're overcommitted and you feel like you're getting more and more stressed out, it might be time for you to step back, reassess, take a look at your feedback loops that you have in your own life and make sure that you're optimally functioning. And if not, you can make those changes, break the cycle, and get back on track towards health and wellness. All we want to do is really get you to your goal as fast as possible in the safest manner possible. And in reality, that requires different methods for different times. So I really just wanted you guys to be aware of how stress plays into that component and how it can slow you down. And so you don't always have to work so hard to get what you want. Sometimes you need to manage yourself appropriately. I know that's not what we all want to hear. Hard work, I feel like, is glorified today, and that's a good thing. But sometimes it's better to work smarter than it is to work harder. So I appreciate you guys spending the time with me. I hope you guys got something out of this. I will share this with you guys briefly, and I'll open up the conversation for Q&A a little bit later on. And this is week number 7 for you guys. That it started from the very beginning. So congratulations, you guys are almost through. Big success so far. So keep sharing those wins with everybody else in the group. And I look forward to hearing your questions and sharing with you guys a little bit more information as we go through this. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.